तक जो किसी है नहीं वो सब पूरे ये लेगा कितने रोज बाहर नहीं सोते जाएगी
आपकी हमने किताब पूरी पढ़ ली
ग्लास ज़्यादा नहीं ग्लास कम करा देखो जी जैसे आपको तोता बन गया
While he's not coming, he's coming. He said his daughter's, daughter's school something is happening.
I know, I remember that too, but I think somewhere, anyway, somewhere.
seminar hall.
Yeah.
So it's been good in a few years, few years. So active.
How are you?
पढ़ी किताब
पूरी पढ़ी सर
Oh, I see.
पूरी पढ़ी and
पता नहीं ममता ने भी करना
first and account आपने किया है this was really educational.
Yeah, I remember that. Some
Some
point
of information, some vivid details I never
I see, yeah.
So then he
I've told him.
How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you? Good to see you again.
So how is it going with the CDs? Are you building them up?
It's good. Well, we just got the letter 2 days ago that the money is going to be, has been approved, so now we know
वो
to
तो
get.
आप थोड़ा सा प्लानिंग ठीक कर लीजिए. There's good money. We should make best use.
No, absolutely.
historical document
I would say that focusing on
your own
segments of students.
count of the entire
Yeah.
Targeting transport.
Yeah.
Some wonderful college, women's college or somebody.
That'll be nice. That's a very timely topic, actually.
Yes. Number two, I think we need to give positive talking points to our youth now. Too much crap.
You're right. We could do with
Too
dose of
much
positivism.
crap.
Need some positive dose.
Oh, sorry, have you
Hi. Ambuj, very nice to meet you.
He is the founder now of the policy frame in IIT. वो भी मैंने किसी दिन बात करनी है आपसे कि how are you tackling the policy?
How are you trying?
40 years.
Has it?
I've been life trustee for 40 years.
Wow.
From his very origins, more or less.
Amazing, huh?
Interested to know what policy or
Well, we're focusing only on science and technology policy, but happy to chat about that.
policy
It's a big
is
thing.
a very big
Big
thing.
thing. Yeah,
In fact, it can trigger revolution in the country.
it's
Look back in the late 19th century, early.
Good evening, everybody. Honorable Dr. Karan Singh ji, Sri N.N. Vora, Honorable President India International Center, Sri Soli Savraj ji, Honorable Trustee of the Center, distinguished guests, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to the launch of this year's theme issue of ISC Quarterly, that is Social Media in Networked World. The ISC Quarterly is the flagship of the Center's publications. It was conceived as a platform for the expression of interesting and provocative ideas on a variety of subjects. The Quarterly has evolved into a special forum for enlightened discourse and continues to be a platform across most disciplines for eminent writers, scholars, statesmen, thinkers, and activists. The contributions also reflect contemporary concerns. The theme and general issues of the Quarterly represent IISc's valuable intellectual input into civil society. The Quarterly presence and relevance over these years is due to its dedicated and loyal readers. However, we hope that many more will begin to subscribe to this journal, which keeps us abreast with the current concerns. Presently, the subscription of Quarterly is restricted to members of the Center, but we have now decided to throw it open to non-members as well. We are also thinking to associate some distinguished publishers with a view to enhance the quarterly's outreach worldwide. So with these few words, I once again extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. After what the Director Srivastava has said just now, I have nothing very much to add except to join him in welcoming all of you. Our quarterly, as Dr. Karan Singh would be telling you presently, is one of our foremost and important instruments, in fact, we use the word symbol of the India International Centre. For those who are interested in reading, writing, being aware of the manifestations of our current times, the arising problems, they are conversant with our journal, both in India and abroad. As it happens, circumstantially, we do not have a large circulation for various reasons, but we are now examining ways and means of making the journal not only available in hard copy but also online. But the subject of this particular issue, which is going to be released presently, we have experts who have written on it, we have experts who will speak about it, but I have only one thing to say very briefly, that it is a very fascinating area, this entire digital business. It's also an equally worrying area. If it is not kept within certain element of control, management, it can lead to some very negative consequences, as I have had occasion personally to see in recent years where I was working. Instruments of social media are being freely used to propagate ideals, ideologies, and various approaches which are extremely negative and, I must say so, dangerous. So with these few words, I welcome all of you once again. Thank you.
Should we do the release now? I think we should do the release now, should we?
I think I should
When
say
do you
few
want
words
that to be?
after I speak.
All right, you speak.
No, actually, I'm not going to take more than a second, too. I just also would like to welcome all of you to the launch of this, what I think is a very topical and also very exciting subject. But I'm not going to comment on the book because I'm hoping all of you are going to read it, and nor am I going to comment on the subject because we have experts. What happens at the end is we have virtually no time to propose a vote of thanks, and I think we have to acknowledge, I have to acknowledge everyone who made this volume possible. I don't see my co-editor Pratik. I believe someone in the family is not well, but Pratik Kanjilal agreed to the joint venture with no coercion, which is actually very rare because I constantly have to harass people, please do this, please come on board, but also our contributors. It was incredible. I wrote to people and they wrote back with a yes or a no. No dithering, no, I didn't have to remind anyone. Some of them are here. And I really, really appreciate the effort you put in and the timely, you deliver on time, and we've been able to have this launch on time. The audience, amazing audience, all our friends, well-wishers, some of our contributors, as I said, are here. I would urge everyone to buy a copy of the book, not only because these contributors have made this such a substantial volume, but also because it has perhaps the most remarkable photo essay that we have had in some years now. I don't see the artist here either, Harsh Raman Singh Paul, who has also done a lot of street art in Lodi Colony, apart from a lot of other work. And he's a new generation. You can't get him to stop talking about social media and Instagram and anything technological, and he's using all that in his art. And that is, the essay is his interpretation of social media. So I would really encourage all of you to have a look at that and buy the book. And thank you all once again. I now request Dr. Karan Singh to release the volume and then take over the proceedings. Thank you.
The Americans call a photo opportunity. President of IIC, Boraji, former President and Trustee Soli Sorabji, Director, discussants on the dais, and friends. The India International Centre Quarterly has now been going for 40 years, and I have in fact been chairman of the editorial board almost from the beginning. It is a very significant service that we render to our members and to the general public. As you know, we come out with 4 issues a year, 2 single issues, and 1 thematic issue. These thematic issues or double issues are directed towards a certain specific topic of contemporary relevance. And we've covered really a whole gamut of these subjects over the years. And what we do is we get a guest editor, and our editorial team works very hard, and we get experts in the field to write from various angles. There is no particular angle that we try and promote. The whole point of IIC is that it is a place where people of different views can have a civilized dialogue, not the sort of dialogue that we see happening in our contemporary political society. And this is, I think, an excellent opportunity for people to get together and to consider these matters. These double issues usually come out in the form of books. There's lots of seats here on that side. And they become collector's items. I know many of them go out of print very soon. I would like to say one thing, because there are many members present here. It's disappointing that more of our members are not subscribing to the quarterly. I think that's a great pity. We have thousands of members, but our subscription is in fact very moderate. I think it would be good if members were to take that little extra, they're very inexpensive, and support this project, because it is really important. I think it is one of the most important things that we do in India International Centre. Now this time we chose an issue of tremendous contemporary significance. Social media is an all-pervasive phenomenon, a tremendous impact on all aspects of our life. I was talking to a friend this afternoon, and I pointed out, I said, for the first 30 years of my life, for my education from KG to PhD, they were sort of, Voraji, same with you, I suppose. There was no TV, there were no mobiles, there were no laptops, there was no social media. People, the modern generation would not believe that you can become educated even without these great intellectual, these new technological developments. We did pretty well, I think, more or less. For human civilization for 3,000 recorded years has done fairly well without the internet. However, now the situation has developed in which it has become now obligatory. We are caught in a situation where we can't do without it and we can't do with it, because we are grappling with the various aspects that it brings about. As Boraji hinted, I mean, the internet is a great thing, but look at the way it can be misused. Look at the trolling and look at the negativities that come across in Facebooks and all. So it is one of those great technologies without which now we cannot live, and therefore we have to deal with it and face the problems that come in the way. I've always been fascinated by what Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk have said about artificial intelligence. They have said, you will recall, that artificial intelligence, Voraji, represents the greatest threat to human civilization ever. Now, for people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk to say that, I mean, they know what they're talking about, for heaven's sake, and they're very significant people. What does that mean? Does that mean that this is going to become a sort of a Frankenstein monster which is going to devour its creator? Or is that an overstating of the case, and can we bring it under control? I have no idea, frankly, because, as I said, I belong to a vanishing generation. I belong to a pre-computer generation. And therefore, I cannot say how it is going. But young people nowadays are ecstatic. I have a granddaughter who came in. She went ecstatic over this. She said, what a wonderful cover, what a wonderful story inside and all. The cover, by the way, you may see is quite dramatic. It shows Kathakali coming to terms with a mobile phone, you know, the traditional and the technological. And he looks totally astonished, like I am, at the wonders and marvels of modern technology. So in any case, I will not say more because, as I said, this is not an area of specific, particular knowledge for me. It's an area of darkness, in fact. But we do have 3 panelists who are going to speak, and I'll briefly introduce them. Pamela Philippos is presently public editor of the New Delhi-based news portal TheWire.in, and was until recently editor-in-chief of the Women's Feature Service, a media agency mandated to highlight gender concerns in mainstream media coverage. Now, gender is one of the good positives where we can use this internet and social media to really bring the problems of women to the surface of our consciousness. And she's also advisor to a media task force of the Government of India's high-level status of Women Committee report a few years ago. She was associate editor of the Indian Express. She's anchored the edit page. She's been awarded the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Woman Journalist. And her book, Media's Shifting Terrain, 5 Years That Transformed the Way India Communicates, has just been brought out by Orient Black Swan. Our second panelist is Rajendra Pawar, who is a good friend, and I've known him for many years, and his family. He is chairman and co-founder of the NIIT Group, comprising NIIT Limited, a global leader in skills and talent development, and NIIT Technologies Limited, a global IT solutions organization. Having revolutionized the IT training industry, he is now involved in establishing an innovative model in higher education, the not-for-profit NIIT University, of which I happen to be Chancellor, by the way, since it was in its inception 10 years ago. That's because Rajendra and I are both from Jammu. Ms. Pawar has been awarded the country's prestigious civilian honor Padma Bhushan, and currently he is the chairman of NASSCOM Cyber Security Task Force. And finally, we have Professor Ambuj Sagar. He is the Vipula and Mahesh Chaturvedi Professor of Policy Studies and the founding head of the School of Public Policy at the IIT Delhi. His interests broadly lie in the intersection of science, technology, and development. His recent work has focused on innovation policy for meeting substantiability and inclusivity challenges, energy innovation policy and strategies, climate change policy and politics, capacity development, and higher education policy. Incidentally, talking of higher education policy, we've been waiting breathlessly for the new education policy for the last 5 years. We've been holding our breath, and nothing has happened. And it seems to be permanently on the anvil. I think the anvil will have collapsed by now because it's been on it for so long. We didn't see anything. We were supposed to see a new education policy in 5 years. Where is it? Let's hope in the next 5 years, whatever happens, we'll come out with a new education policy. So anyhow, I'll therefore call upon... Prateek has come. I was wondering where you were. I was going to introduce you. Prateek Kanjilal is our co-editor. He will speak at the end. He is literary editor and leader writer of the Economic Times and publisher of the Little magazine.
It's the Indian Express.
It says Economic Times here. A long time ago. You must update your bios. You must update your bios, editor. Economic Times and Down to Earth. He has worked with Business Standard, the Economic Times and Down to Earth. He's also a literary translator. What is your second language? Hindi?
Hindi, a bit of Bengali.
Okay. You never have a bit of Bengali. You either have Bengali or don't have Bengali. And has been awarded the Sahitya Academy Translation Prize. Anyhow, so Deepa, you're on. Pamela.
So first, it's wonderful to be here. Dr. Karan Singh, Chairperson, IIC Editorial Board, Mr. N.N. Vora, Director of IIC, K.N. Srivastava, the two editors of this quarterly, Pratik Kanchilal and Omita Goyal, the contributors to this journal, and I see many of them here. It's great that you made it, because something like this is a rare publication. It's very difficult to get people to keep deadlines. You must have done some extraordinary arm twisting to get them to do that.
Persistent.
So I think it's a really good effort. And my fellow panelists, first one needs to flag the fact that by bringing out the quarterly on the theme of social media in a networked world, it marks something of a rite of passage for the IIC. Always seen in the mold of the classical, with an almost disdain for new age edginess. But change, we know, is the only constant, and IIC is now increasingly embracing the digital reality. Last year, it held a series of very important lectures on the social, economic, and political impacts of internet technologies. And now I learn, to my great horror, that membership cards are soon to be digitalized. The thing about changes in communication technologies and media platforms that we are experiencing even as we speak is a transformation they have wrought in the world around us. We still have not been able to fathom the impacts that digitalization is having on the human condition. But one thing can be said for sure, that it is deceptively discreet in the way it creeps upon us. Robin Jeffrey and Asa Doran, in their book, The Cell Phone Nation, write about a new device, the mobile phone. Despite initially meeting with ambivalence, even resistance from ordinary people, it went on to become so intrinsic to the daily existence of so many that over a period of time they could no longer imagine life without it. Older and newer technologies, and here I'd like to take the point you raised that we were all from an earlier generation that didn't have anything to do with social media. That may be the case, but I would like to put together the theory that we are talking really of older and newer media. It's not old and new. Nothing is static in this. And if you look at the entire progress, you're quite right, from human civilization, from cave paintings onwards, it's been an evolution. And everything is added on. And in fact, the point is it's additive rather than substitutive very often. And the argument that digital media, each category has older and newer media often regarded as binaries, but this in fact is a fallacy. Each category may have its distinct ways of functioning and spheres of influence, but no single media platform in contemporary times exists in a vacuum. This is also why the argument that digital media does not impact those outside urban network spaces and who don't possess a smartphone, is outside it. I mean, while we recognize the digital divide, it's also true that no one really is immune to it. The digital divide does exist in terms of millions of people not being able to access the use of new communication technologies because of their geographical and social location. But the content generated by digital media does not remain confined to merely digital spaces. Like water, it permeates all over, including older media like the radio, newspaper, and television. The manner in which a WhatsApp rumor about kidnappers in the neighborhood blew up into a horrific act of vigilantism in rural Jharkhand would indicate this permeability. You know, no one really can be away from the rumor or the information that comes through social media. One of the laws, as I had just talked about, one of the laws of communication technology, according to John Norton, is that newer media is generally additive rather than substitutive. And he says, which is a fancy way of...
Addictive.
Additive, both, I would say. Which is a fancy way of saying that new technologies generally don't wipe out older ones, although the arrival of newer media does change the media ecosystem. What typically happens, according to him, is that as newer media emerge, they challenge the existing media, which then either adapt to the newcomer or fade into irrelevance. To illustrate this trajectory, he cites the example of how the arrival of broadcast television in Britain in the 50s led to two distinct transformations in the newspaper market in that country. While the mass circulating tabloids adapted to the change by becoming parasitic on television content, the quality broadsheets responded by offering the public more commentary and feature articles rather than just raw news. In India, the introduction of color television in 1982 for the Asiad had consequences for the universe of the Indian media that went far beyond television sets. And we know, for instance, video technology that came in at that point, and the way in which films, for instance, entered television in a much more marked way was also linked to color television. It is often argued that communication technologies and the media they support, it's also argued, as socially and politically liberatory in and of themselves. We know these technologies are potentially able to make possible new forms of social interaction. They can modify or undermine old forms of interaction, create new foci and new terms of action and interaction, and thereby serve to restructure existing social relations. They lend themselves to the articulation of counter-hegemonic narratives and help individuals, social activists, and collectivities constituting the public to gain visibility and voice. But to see them as transformative would betray a determinism that overlooks the manifold contexts of their uses, and I think we have just had a glimpse of that in some of the earlier conversations. In a profound way, new communication technologies and media platforms have overtaken human agency, having created gigantic corporate monopolies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, who now occupy the commanding heights of the world economy. This is an aspect underlined by Prabir Purakayastha, who's here with us, in his chapter in this journal, and he remarks how by decentralizing content, the internet and social media have given rise to, open quotes, new, even more powerful monopolies as a new gatekeepers. In India, new monopolies have emerged thanks to the corporate-friendly policies of the Modi government. The Digital India program is supported at home by conglomerates like Reliance Jio and global digital behemoths. The only tool we have to negotiate this labyrinth, resist attempts at control and capture, and build enabling systems, including enabling legal frameworks, is knowledge of what is happening around us. In that sense, this quarterly is extremely valuable, bringing as it does the insights of experts across the spectrum. It was only public awareness and a continued engagement that is required, as Apar Gupta has highlighted, that has kept the principle of net neutrality afloat in this country. And let me tell you, there are many countries in Africa, for instance, that actually succumbed to Facebook's free basics. Here, thanks to a campaign based on understanding the impacts, the possible impacts, we were able to actually ensure that we protected the idea of net neutrality. Also, to ensure that the draconian Section 66 of the Information Technology Act was struck down is also an indication of how human interventions have proved so valuable in this field. It has also given us judgments that reflect what the loss of privacy, and by the way, we don't have a privacy law as such, and privacy is not protected in this country as yet.
I thought the Supreme Court judgment did protect.
Yes, as case law, but it's not translated into legislation. Yeah. So, it has given us judgments that reflect what the loss of privacy truly means and helped us realize the full implications of something like, say, the Cambridge Analytica data breach and the reality of stolen elections. It also allows us insights into the phenomenon of the digital divide with its multi-layered caste, class, and gender attributes. So when you look at the digital divide, we have to see that it is a many-layered thing, because, for instance, the number of cell phone users tend to be male. I mean, it could change as smartphones and cell phones become cheaper. But at the moment, that piece of, that tool to communicate rests firmly in the masculine hand, and that has implications. We know, for instance, we have had, a panchayat, saying that young girls should not be given cell phones because they could be led astray and so on. And this is all indicative of a very patriarchal way of looking at technologies. Let us also, so it's important, of course there are dangers, but the point is we need education, knowledge, more information, rather than, stopping people from having access to certain technologies. Let us also not forget, as this quarterly has flagged, that the government had proposed a social media monitoring tool which would have collected both data and metadata of users to generate what it was termed as a 360-degree view of voices on the internet, and which could lead or swing conversations. In other words, what was being proposed was the creation of a 24/7 surveillance society. The proposal, as it happened, created such public outrage that it was firmly rejected, which underlines once more how important it is for the ordinary person to understand information technology processes that are going on and which impact directly on her or his life. The past we cannot change. The future we could perhaps, but only if we know what it could look like. And we must know what it could look like, the dystopias that exist within the utopias. It is for this reason that I congratulate once again IIC for this quarterly edition and its editors and contributors who have tried to map out a complex geography that has profound implications for our common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You say the past cannot be changed, but we are now told that Rana Pratap won the Battle of Haldighati. Now, Rajendra, tell us about your marvelous NIIT experience, which is quite extraordinary.
So actually this topic is a very rich topic because there's a lot of new ideas here. Whether we talk of the way society is responding to this networked world or to the screen, as we call it, whether it's a phone or a computer. And the impact of these changes is still, I think, being understood or recognized because it's huge and very rapidly changing. So rather than look at the consequences of these changes or the contradictions and the tensions, I just wanted to share with you what I've been reflecting on for quite a while now, to see what really is the underlying reason, the nature of the change, what really is driving this change. And I want to touch on two central concepts. One is that with the coming of the digital world, and we have to trace it back to the creation of the transistor, when we could store information in a piece, in a mechanical device. So we saw for the first time with the transistor that it was a set of atoms, but it also had information. So the engagement of society with atoms, which is what we do for a living, we have materials, transposing them from one form to the other, we consume them, we produce them, and livelihood is around creation and working with atoms. With the coming of the information age, the information stored along with the atoms, the bits is what we call them, are becoming, in the atom and bit equation, the bits are increasing in a huge size because the cost of producing a bit in digital electronics has been falling and is predicted to fall for a long time to come. So products of the past were a set of materials which were full of atoms. And now you have no material that is sold which doesn't have information in it, including a coffee making machine. Whatever you take, there's a lot of information in it. And each of these products is now on the internet, it's connected. And therefore you have Internet of Things, which connects things, but all the things have information which is moving to and fro. We hear about your home where the refrigerator can be controlled from your phone or whatever. So the information which is working with the atoms has gone from close to 0% information and 100% atoms to 99 point how many decimal points percent of bits to a minuscule percentage of atoms. This is a fundamental transformation which is happening in society. And so in a world where we were working with atoms, we are now in a world where the atoms have become less important. So it's the coming of the services industry, the information sector versus manufacturing in a machine, using raw materials and transforming them into finished goods. The preoccupation of the society, already for over 10 years, is now with bits. All of us are engaged with bits. Now this movement from preoccupation with atoms to move to preoccupation with bits has changed our lives. But the important thing is not the fact that the bits have arrived. The important thing is that the world of bits, and by world I mean the economics of bits, the politics of bits, the social impact of bits, the regulation of bits when we talk of privacy and so on, is a completely new phenomena which is not understood. The economics of bits, for example, why does a company which keeps making losses have such a valuation? Our idea of economics was built around the bit, which means if I have 1 million bits of gold and I wanted to share it equally with someone, we get 500,000 each, because bits are limited in nature. But if I have 1 million bits of music and I want to give it to someone else, not one but 100 people, I can give the 1 million bits with close to zero marginal cost. Close to zero. A piece of music, perfect copy of that, and 1 million copies of that when we send WhatsApp to so many people. The cost of creating that copy is close to zero, whereas the cost of the atom is finite. Now this is a very fundamental change which we haven't fully understood the impact of. So the economics of bits is not understood. So why is it that these few companies, which are now the most valuable companies, don't make anything? Because they're making information. But they're not making information. We are the information for them. We say we are the data. So when we say everything about me is known, that's bits about me, which are being captured, used, processed, sold. So the whole economics is of bits. So the move from atoms to bits, I think, is one of the most profound underlying changes which is causing all these things to happen, and we haven't quite got our arms around what that means. The second point I want to touch on, and then I'll join the two when you talked about Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, why are they scared? And why should we be worried? The second is that this century, which I would like to call the century of the mind, is because bits are products of the mind. An idea is a set of bits. We receive bits and we transform them and we produce more bits. Life is that. So, if in the new world, it's not the computer which is the machine, it's the human mind. The computer only is an aid to do it faster or store it or send it. So in this century of the mind, the preoccupation of society is with bits, and we are consuming them and we are producing them. And then the minds are now connected. When you have a device, so we talk of networked world, which basically means the bits that I'm receiving and sending to anybody anywhere on this planet in real time, right here and now, is connecting the minds, and the bits are moving freely. And when we talk of social media, it's the ways in which they move. So these are all new things. These are all new things which are engaging us. And I would say these are very early days when we are trying to grapple with the issues. So the institutions as we know them, order as we know it, everything is, I wouldn't say collapsing. And there's a nature of being additive, but it's transformational. So the word disruption, which we are hearing these days, is coming up again and again. Everything is getting disrupted. Why? Because bits are free and they're products of the mind. And these two fundamental changes need to be understood, and it's tough. So when Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk say they are worried about artificial intelligence, it's about the mind being replicated by the computer. Till now, man, the inventor, has invented things to deal with limitations of the self. The aeroplane, the phone, the TV. How far can you see? The television delimits that. How much you can hear, you get a telephone. You get. For the first time now, man has embarked on duplicating something which we don't know, which is the mind. So artificial intelligence is an attempt by the mind to create its own copy. And I wanted to close by saying that as we understand the mind and uncover, we will probably get confronted with the Adi Shankaracharya's questions of who am I? And we keep removing the layers as we say, oh, I am Rajendra Pawar. No, that's my name. Who am I? I am a male. Well, that's my gender. Who am I? You keep doing till you come to zero, as we call it, shunya, which is not zero, right? And that we call as pure consciousness. So we see everything beyond pure consciousness as an attribute. So when scientists are debating on can we make a copy of ourselves, we get stuck at this point because we haven't quite been able to explain this point at the end. We can explain everything which is attributes. So artificial intelligence will take us that far. But like some of the articles say here, the computer doesn't know it exists.
That's what we think.
That's what we think. Because we don't understand ourselves, the whole point. So to me, I think the dilemma or the opportunity, both ways, we can see is that we are beginning to now work on the thing which we think helps us to think, helps us to know. And we've built a device which can deal with bits, like the human mind does. And we are on a journey where we don't quite know how we think, how we feel, how we do stuff. Until we discover that, we'll have all kind of interesting chaos. And therefore a lot of opportunity and a lot of fun. I want to stop with that.
The philosophical implications of this technology development is something which really needs to be looked into very carefully in the light of various philosophies. Professor Ambuj Sagar, you're on.
Thank you. And thank you very much to India International Center for inviting me here. I completely agree, actually, what Pamela said. It's actually a very timely contribution, this volume. I think it's obviously everybody recognizes the importance of the digital world, but actually within that social media and in a network world, which means social media that's actually connecting large numbers of people. These are very new and powerful forms of connectivity, very powerful technology. And like any technology, it raises a whole set of questions. I think actually, and it's true of many technologies, and actually, as Dr. Karan Singh said, technology are things you can't live with it, but you can't live without it. It actually often cuts both ways. And I think what we have to think about in society is how do you manage the positive impacts of technology or gain from the positive benefits of technology while managing the negative. And we at IIT Delhi have just established a School of Public Policy to think about precisely these kind of questions. And I have to say, when we started talking about that school many years ago, took us a while to establish that, I think this whole question of this intersection between data, computation, and communication had not become as prominent as it's become now. And I think we're beginning to realize that for us, even at IIT, this has to be, questions relating to this area are something that are going to be extraordinarily central to our lives. So I think this kind of a volume that you've put together, I think is absolutely getting to the questions that are going to be, are already emerging, but going to continue to take on importance in our lives. What I thought I would do is just put out, from somebody who thinks about public policy, think about the kind of questions that these issues of social media in a network world put out. And I'm going to just put out 4 or 5 examples as a way to provoke a conversation. I think the first issue that this raises is what I would call social media and the self. And this is actually some really amazing work being done by Shari Turkle, who's a sociologist at MIT, who has written these really lovely books. One is called Alone Together. And basically it is reflecting on what actually these communication technologies and social media broadly and the network society are doing to it, where we are effectively focused more on our screens, I think you talked about the screen, than to each other. And so I think the kind of the sociological implications of social media in a network world are quite significant, and we are beginning to, I think we're just only now beginning to understand how deep-seated these issues might be. It turns out that, I think again it was mentioned that social media is addictive. And actually it is addictive by design. It's turning out that the folks who are building these platforms are designing addiction into the platforms. And so in some senses, it is sucking us in, not willy-nilly, but actually the technology itself is designed to do that. And we know that. We know that of technology, that technology is not something that's autonomous. We are the ones who design the technology, and effectively the technology has particular design characteristics and certain politics built into it that leads to particular kind of outcomes. And when you actually build something that's addictive, it is going to actually take over your mind and, as I said, certainly have some sociological implications. The other area that I would say that we need to think about from the point of view of public policy or how to manage implications of this technology is this question of data privacy, but what people call about data extraction, data commodification, and control leading to that. So effectively, we are able to now extract our preferences from social media using technology. Those can be commodified, sold, and we can actually be manipulated using that very knowledge. So it turns out to be something where we are not just contributors to the economy, but we are also, in some sense, the recipients of many of these things. And there's actually a lot of really interesting work going on. People are using terms like the attention economy, where actually what's being traded as our attention or grabbed as attention. And this very new recent book called Surveillance Capitalism, which is making the case that actually the fundamental nature of capitalism itself is changing because of information being at the heart, as Rajendra just said, information being at the heart of these transactions. So I think this is again something we actually have to think about what does this mean, and both for individuals to be giving their data and enabling all of these, but also from the view of public policy, it has implications of bigger set of decisions. I would actually say the next area that we need to think about is actually the shaping of public policy by social media enterprises. There's a very interesting article recently about Facebook actually in a number of countries has been shaping public policy around data privacy. And of course, you can for a company like Facebook, it makes a lot of sense to engage in shaping of these of areas around data privacy, because it actually goes to the core of the business model. And of course, they're not the only ones. So we are finding that there is actually inherent, in a sense, a conflict of interest between the interests of the enterprises that are behind the social media. As Pamela said, the big titans of today's enterprises, the titanic enterprises, and where public policy may be taking us. I think we also heard about this intersection between social media and the reshaping of democracy. We've seen that in Cambridge Analytica. We are seeing that with all these platforms, Twitter, WhatsApp, that are actually shaping political conversations and democratic outcomes, and therefore really going to the heart of what it even means for us to be participant in our political and social lives. And I think the last point I just want to put out here is this very interesting question about how do you even think about management of these technologies? This is national versus transnational governance. Who should actually regulate an entity like Facebook if it needs to be regulated? Everybody is a player in this area. And this is actually what we call the networked economy, which is an economy in which the more people that are on a platform, the more value the platform gets. So the more people that are part of a network of Facebook, the more useful it is for other people to get onto it. So it actually is a kind of positive feedback. Everybody's on Facebook, therefore everybody wants to be on Facebook, and therefore Facebook gains more and more power, and therefore you really get into these structures where it tends towards monopolies and very, very powerful entities where everybody in the world is a part of this entity, and yet we don't know who is it who might govern and manage that. And this is not, of course, not just Facebook. It's also happening in other areas such as climate change, where we are fighting, or there's a tension between national and transnational governance. So I think I wanted to just put that out as examples of how social media in a network world is really throwing up a whole set of challenges that we really are not geared up to deal with. And I'm not saying us as only actually India, but I think we're seeing this as a global problem. I think globally countries are struggling with what to do with this very powerful technology that obviously offers a lot of benefits to people, and yet is beginning to raise a whole set of challenges that are very fundamental at multiple levels that is probably going to be affecting us more and more. So certainly I think a fair amount of food for thought, and so I'm really glad that the Indian International Center is actually, by putting out this volume, is going to be initiating and contributing to that debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Prateek Kanjilar, our co-editor.
Am I the last to go?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I am the last always. You're second last.
So, in a sense, as the poet sang, in the end, Miss Pushpa will do the summing up. I think it's, if I am to sum up, let me take you back a long time ago, about 25 years back. Yeah, that's when I bought my first computer. It had no hard drive. You're not going to believe this. It had 2 megabytes of RAM, 1 megabyte in each slot. It was a bizarre thing. I had no money, absolutely. That thing with a modem connected to the internet and did many fine things. It was a rudimentary period, but it did fairly well for itself. What I remember is that many of the elements that we see as essential features and troubling features of the internet right now existed at that time. There were viruses. 2 Pakistani brothers put out a sort of virus called Brain. There's still an internet company called Brain Internet in Pakistan now. There were hackers. In 1995, Kevin Mitnick became a celebrity by being the first to be arrested for an internet crime. There was even, in a very limited sense, social media. In fact, social media existed before the internet, when people connected through bulletin boards, which were like local nodes, and the internet connected them all finally. But before that, there were these local communities that used to connect to each other. You could have a bulletin board conversation of a few hundred people. Whereas now, let's look at what has changed. if you go back to that 2 megabyte, 2-bit computer that I had, today it's the hard drive on my machine is 1 terabyte, which is an incomprehensible figure for me. This phone that I have has more storage than my computer had 5 years ago. Storage is kind of important because you need large volumes of storage to enable big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. In terms of what the internet provided, what has changed? What I'm saying is that everything remains the same, actually. The disruption that has happened is a question of scale. The connectivities that we have are far, far greater, and it's more like a tree now than a tree with lots of branches, rather than a single stem of communication. Another thing which has changed is that we're kind of confused now. Because earlier, information came to us through separate channels. A newspaper was a newspaper. It landed on your doorstep. You knew how to gauge its credibility. What your neighbor told you, the local gossip, similarly, came down a different channel, and you knew how to gauge that also, the reliability of that information. But now everything is coming down onto the same screen. Everything, the photoshopped image of the Prime Minister and the real image of the Prime Minister are coming down on the same screen, and the mind finds it difficult to differentiate between the two. I think that has become a serious problem now, and fake news I would identify as the biggest political problem of today. What else has changed? The internet was originally conceived as a different place. It was the other place, where you could even be somebody else. So anonymity and pseudonymity they were like touchstones. They were very savagely protected. After that, the same platform began to be used for banking transactions, getting the news, all the things that you do in everyday life. At that point, it became impossible to remain anonymous or pseudonymous. So that the Wild West nature and the experimental nature and the liberating nature of the internet changed to some extent. It became a little confused. Now, if you want to experience that, you would probably go to Second Life or something like that, which is, or play a role-playing game. Earlier, it was part of real life. What else has changed? Disruption has finished off old hierarchies, but it's created much more powerful new hierarchies, which are structurally the same as they used to be. The problem remains. Technology has really not solved the problem of good and evil. It was not supposed to. Where I'm coming at is technology is really an opportunity. It's not going to give you a solution to the problems that it raises. That can only come from law, from legislation, not even from case law. That's the distinction that you made. Even case law is insufficient, I think. It needs legislation. And legislation, this is a new experience for us because the internet does not respect borders. So you need legislation which similarly is agreed upon across borders. Now, we talked about artificial intelligence and Stephen Hawking and so on. Sometimes these anxieties about new technology are they're amplified because we sort of amplify from a very particular instance to a general problem. I'll give you an instance. Last year there was a lot of news flutter everywhere where 2 Facebook bots had to be shut down because it was said that they had acquired artificial intelligence. They had become independent. This was not really true. These were bargaining bots. They're taught to bargain with each other more and more efficiently. They learn how to bargain. And they were playing this game where you traded little objects, like there were some spheres and some cubes, geometrical shapes, and they were supposed to trade them to a point of mutual satisfaction, where each thought that they had got the best deal possible. Now, what happened was that they began to speak a private language. So one would say, it might say, green cubes to me, to me, to me, and then you. Humans can't make much sense of this, but it's actually very easy. So many cubes to me, to me, to me means I want 3 green cubes. And you means what will you take in return from me? But it has to be just 2 of whatever. So it's a bargain statement. What had happened was that artificial intelligence systems are basically incentivized systems. They're given incentives to perform in certain ways. What was overlooked here was that there was no incentive to speak in English. So the bots developed what was more efficient communication in their own logical structure.
Didn't try Bengali?
It should have, but it might have been revolutionary. Another
denigrating that.
No, what I'm saying is that from this particular instance, which is overlooking a very specific problem in a very large program, one cannot extrapolate to a threat. Second is Bitcoin. It's a rogue currency. It has not lived up to any expectations at all. It is completely useless except to a completely wild speculator. But at the same time, the blockchain which underlies it has turned into an extremely useful ledger system which can't be falsified. You would need, it records transactions on a, let us say, a single strip of data. Now, to alter that record would require the cooperation of all the stakeholders, which is impossible to get in a real life situation. You can't expect everyone to lie, except when the stakes are really high. So it's a very useful ledger system for things like property data, transactions, and so on, and it has the promise of dramatically reducing litigation. Property matters are usually about false claims. False claims cannot be made in such a case. Third, and this is, I'm going out on a limb on this one, biometrics was central to the debate about Aadhaar. Absolutely reliable identification. Now, I personally think, this, we'll look back on this debate 20, 30 years later and find we were wasting our time. Because there's this thing called quantum computing, which is about 20, 30 years away, really speaking. It's claimed to be much closer, but, digital companies make wild claims always. But when it does come, not only will every password be hackable, everything that you enter into a computer or a service or whatever, it will be trivial to hack it. But also, public key encryption will be completely hackable. So the only signature that you're left with is biometric, really. Another thing which has changed in the meantime is while media, or rather failed to change, I wish it had changed, is that the economics of media has not changed. Old media has become new media, but it is still dependent on putting advertisers and consumers together. The news is fairly incidental, really speaking. In this issue, Winton Cerf particularly points out the problematic nature of that because it has been amplified. Because now, in order to get more traffic, you are users, ordinary people like you and me, are encouraged to display more and more extreme behavior in order to get attention. And it's because of that model, because attention pays somewhere. So it's a picture that in 25 years has changed a lot, but at the same time, the structurals have not changed very much. I think that's really all I had to say.
Thank you. So all I can say at the end, all I want to say at the end is that quite clearly there are profound implications of social media. The political implications are obvious, because social media can and is being used to sway people's minds by putting out either correct or incorrect information. There are social implications, because people can be trolled, their reputations can be destroyed overnight by by tweet by somebody, and the social implications are there. There are legal implications. I'm sure a whole field of new law is going to come up on this social media, how they should be, what are the legal implications of this. And there are educational implications. None of you have yet spoken about the importance of this on education. How do we learn? That's a whole new debate. So there are these profound implications, and finally there are philosophical implications. What does it all mean? How is it all related to our existential situation? So it seems to me to be fascinating, at least 5 different areas of profound impact, all of which need to be studied and developed. So I'm grateful to the editor and her team, and to the co-editor, by really producing what could be considered a layman's guide to social media, because people like me who don't know anything about it, if we read through this volume, you at least get some kind of a glimpse of what this profound object called social media really can do. And I'm sure all of you in the audience will enjoy reading the volume. Thank you very much. Good night.